As an ordained rabbi of many decades, I have seen a great deal of confusion about and even rejection of Judaism because many Jews don't understand that the teachings and perspectives of Torah are not the same as the teachings and perspectives of Judaism. It is really important that Jews understand what Torah is, what Judaism is, and how the two are related to one another. Otherwise, serious misunderstandings occur. I'm Rabbi Laura Rappaport, and I welcome you to Open for Discussion, a space where Judaism, critical thinking, and open-minded curiosity come together.
Everything here is open for discussion.
What is Torah? The word Torah at its root is the word that means instruction or teaching. And in a very broad sense, you can use the word Torah to mean all Jewish learning in general. But I'm going to use it here in its more narrow sense to refer specifically to the first 5 books of the Bible, which are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Scholars have advanced a number of theories about when and where and how these writings and stories and narratives and lessons have come about. And not surprisingly, there is a lot of disagreement about their origins. There is much to support that the 5th book, Deuteronomy, was written later than the others. It is clear that all the books contain traditions that originated from slightly different Israelite subgroups. We see this in the different names that are used for people and places within the Torah, and because sometimes we see shifts within individual stories as to who the primary hero or the primary figure is. At some point, the stories were all woven together into one work, perhaps as part of the move toward bringing greater unity to the Israelite people. So the first thing we have to understand is there are many question marks surrounding the origins of the Torah's stories. From just a simple reading of the text, it's clear that there are different oral traditions from within the Israelite people that were woven together over a period of time. There is a tradition that the entire Torah was dictated by God to Moses. However, this is not a perspective of a Judaism that uses scholarship, critical thinking, scientific reasoning, or historical analysis, so I do not consider that an option. Another important thing to understand, the Jewish Bible begins with the 5 books of Torah, and then it goes beyond that. The Jewish Bible is called Tanakh. Tanakh represents the letters that start each of the 3 sections of our Bible: Torah, Nevi'im, which means prophets, and Ketuvim, which means writings, but amounts to basically miscellaneous books that come from different time periods that are generally read on Jewish holidays, or in the case of Psalms, used extensively in the Jewish prayer book. It is really important to know that no one sat down one day and wrote the Bible. It is a varied collection of stories that reflect a diversity of cultures and time periods. We do not know when these tales began to be told, but an educated guess would be about 1200 BCE, And the latest book in the biblical collection is the book of Daniel, which contains theology and language that would put it around 200 BCE, somewhere in that general area. So the entire Tanakh, the entire Bible, spans about 1,000 years. That's why it makes no sense to ask a question like, what does the Bible say about whatever? Where in the Bible are you talking about? Are you talking about material from 1,000 BCE? Are you talking about material from 200 BCE? A lot happened in that span of time.
It's so big.
It's very important to know that the Bible does not represent a single coherent narrative. It is not written from one single point of view about life, about humanity, about what life is. Another really important point, there are no Jews and there is no Judaism in the Torah. The Torah's stories are very important and central within Judaism because they serve as the foundation of what later will evolve into what we think of now as Judaism. Judaism is an evolution of thought and understanding that has been molded over the centuries by our historical experience. You have to remember that when you read Torah stories, you are reading an ancient worldview. You're reading a very early understanding of what God is, about how God works in the world. You read about Israelites or Hebrews or sometimes what's called Bnei Yisrael, the people of Israel. It is not accurate to read a story out of Torah and say, oh, this gives me the Jewish view of God, or this gives me the Jewish view of reward and punishment. No.
Definitely not.
What the Torah does tell you is the ancient Israelite view of these things, of these themes. And even within the Torah itself, since Deuteronomy is later, it reflects a slightly more evolved and sophisticated view over some of the earlier stories. So even within the Torah itself, we're seeing some development. So the big question might be, so when does Judaism begin? Judaism began on August 12th, 124 CE. No, I'm kidding. Obviously, you can't date Judaism to a single day in history. Doesn't happen that way. Nothing happens that way. It develops gradually. And of course, how you define Judaism is going to completely determine when you see that beginning. So the answer to this question is, surprise, very subjective. The name Judaism comes from Judah, the last tribe left standing after the 10 northern Israelite tribes were taken over by the Assyrians in 721 BCE, and after the small southern tribe of Benjamin was absorbed into the larger tribe of Judah. Around the time of the Hanukkah story, around 2nd century BCE, the word Judah or Judean starts to be used to not only refer to the people who live within that geographic area of Judah, but also to people who are from there, who observe the religious and cultural practices of the Judean people. So we are starting around this time to see the word approach what we would think of as a more modern idea of Judaism. But the way I see it, Judaism really begins in the early 1st century CE with the early teachers that we often call simply the rabbis. And the reason I say that is because that is the time when everything goes down.
When it all went down.
In the year 70 CE, we have the Roman takedown of Jerusalem, of the Jerusalem temple, of Judah. And with that huge watershed, we have the destruction of the temple as the spiritual center of Jewish life, the destruction of the temple priesthood, the end of the offering of sacrifices to connect with God, the end of the official structure that has made up Jewish religious life for centuries. It's a violent destruction of Judaism as a religion that was unprecedented at the time, and it could be argued has never really been seen since. Judaism could have easily and very understandably just ended right there. And yet, because Jews are the most stubborn people on earth, we were like, nope, we're going to make this work.
We're going to make it work.
So around this time and beyond, we have religious leaders who come together and remake Judaism for a new modern time, a post-temple time, a post-priesthood time, a post-sacrifice time, a time when Jewish life is forced to exist in various locations outside of our spiritual central homeland. A Passover Seder is one example of a ritual designed by these leaders to keep the core of Passover teachings in a new world. A world without sacrifices or the temple or a central self-governed Jewish center. Passover instead becomes a home observance, with ancient priest-based practices being lived out on one's dining room table through discussion and the eating of symbolic foods. The early rabbis, again, that's a very general phrase, it generally refers to Jewish teachers and leaders and sages who lived in Jerusalem and the surrounding area at the end of the temple period, and then after the year 70, leaders who lived out in the diaspora over the next few hundred years. So no, the term the rabbis or our early rabbis does not refer to a group of guys who sat around a table and invented Judaism. Just like the Bible, we are talking about leaders who lived over the course of a few centuries, who experienced different life circumstances, societal circumstances, different historical events. So during much of this time, when Judaism was really starting to take shape in the modern sense that we have today, the two major cultures that our rabbis and the Jewish community would have been exposed to were Greek culture and Roman culture. They were extremely influential over this part of the world, and you can clearly see that in our early rabbinic writings. One is from the language used, one example being the Greek term synagogue, adopted then, still used today to refer to the place we gather for worship and study. We see the culture's influence by the institution of Torah study being a replacement for the temple offerings. We see the cultural influence in the shift from a priesthood leadership that was passed down within family lines from father to son, switching from that to more of a teacher-student model, sort of a mentor picks the best students, the best disciples, and from that group is chosen the one who will then be the primary teacher in the next generation. We see Greco-Roman influence in the way that we still traditionally determine Jewish identity, which is through the mother. And as I mentioned before, the institution of the Passover Seder after the destruction of the temple. All these things to us seem so fundamentally Jewish, and they are, and all were drawn from the larger culture at the time, 2,000 years ago, that was heavily, heavily influenced by the Greeks and the Romans. To review, Judaism is the adaptation of ancient Torah teachings to modern circumstances. That is what our early rabbis did 2,000 years ago, and that is what every generation of Jews has done over the centuries to keep our tradition relevant to modern lives. There are amazing and, one might say, radical Torah ideas and values that are eternal and which continue to drive us today to work toward a more fair and just and compassionate and respectful world. The early rabbis understood this. They felt strongly they wanted these values to live on despite everything that was going on around them in the world. And so using the best they had at their time, with the knowledge they had, to the best of their abilities, they attempted to shape a post-temple Judaism that brought out the best in each of us as individuals, and that brought out the best in us as a group coming together to form a just and compassionate society. And that process continues to this day, as it must.
Everything here is open for discussion.